It's been some time since we last heard from government bodies who have every intention of tackling the issue of loot boxes and holding game companies accountable for their nefarious business practices. And leading the charge on this front is the United Kingdom, which has been conducting their own investigations, holding hearings with companies like EA and Epic, and just really going out of their way to express their disdain against this business model that is flat out just disguised gambling. Now, we have recently heard back from the UK, according to the following article published by The Guardian, the headline which reads, UK could class loot boxes as gambling to protect children. Ministers call for evidence on video games such as FIFA that charge money for rewards. Scrolling down here, the body of the article reads, loot boxes could be classified as gambling products over concern. They're training children to gamble. And if not training, at the very least, exposing them to the sensations that come with gambling that could get them addicted, that could make them more prone to that kind of compulsive behavior when they grow up. Unlike violence in video games where if you shoot someone in Grand Theft Auto, you're not really killing a person, with loot boxes, you are spending real dollars for the chance of obtaining a desired reward, and that's literally what gambling is. If there were no monetary elements involved, if it's virtual gambling, that's one thing, but this is real-life gambling we're talking about, with real money that's being used to engage in this activity. And according to many ratings boards, virtual gambling alone warrants a higher game rating, but for loot boxes, for some reason, there's just a lot of leeway that's provided because there's just a lot of money in it. That's really what it's all about, money. The article continues, the Department of Digital, Culture, Media, and Sport will this week launch a call for evidence on the increasingly common feature of games such as the football franchise FIFA. The move has been spurred by mounting concern that the mechanics of loot boxes are encouraging gambling-style behavior among children, potentially leading them into addiction later in life. So yeah, this call for evidence is happening pretty soon. The following article was published on June 7th, 2020, so that means that by June 14th, we will have seen this call for evidence take place, and let me tell you, there's plenty of evidence out there that's already been presented to the UK Parliament and the various government bodies that are tackling the issue of loot boxes, and just about every organization that's looked into loot boxes have recommended that they be considered gambling and that they be banned to children, to anyone under 18. This is just something that most consumer protection organizations and government bodies agree on, alongside the gamers and customers who purchase these games who have discovered the nefarious nature of loot boxes. And when that many people agree on something, well, yeah, change can happen. The article then notes how the loot box's value to the video games industry has been estimated at £23 billion a year and rising. It is a goldmine at the expense of customers and players and the creative integrity of video games, and that's why games organizations and companies, publishers, and certain developers are pushing so hard to try to distract from this narrative and reality that loot boxes are gambling. Moving on, the article talks about the consequences if loot boxes were to be classified as gambling, stating that the decision would have a significant impact on game developers who could be forced to withdraw some titles or redesign them so that they can be sold to people under 18. We have already seen something like this take effect in countries like Belgium, where they flat out said loot boxes are gambling, obey our laws, remove the loot boxes or the ability to pay for loot boxes or suffer the consequences. And so we've seen companies like EA, after fighting against Belgium, back down and remove the ability to pay for FIFA card packs. We have seen companies like Nintendo pull mobile games that violated gambling and loot box laws. We have seen Overwatch pull loot boxes from Belgium, and Square Enix pulled 3 of their games from Belgium after the country banned loot boxes, so on and so forth. The same could happen for the UK. Now, what's particularly impactful about the prospect of the UK regulating loot boxes is that there are major franchises like FIFA that are very popular in this country. While it's great that Belgium took the necessary steps, the fact remains that Belgium is a relatively small market. But if a country like UK enacts loot box regulations, that will affect profit margins for EA and other companies that release titles popular in the UK. And so that would dissuade them from implementing loot box mechanics, because it would mean that they would have to rate their games as an adults-only game, and that would mean that games like FIFA would not sell as much. Like, what's made FIFA such an accessible title on a mass market level is the PEGI 3 rating, or that E for everyone rating, that does not reflect the fact that these games actually do have content meant for adult, or activities that are meant for adult. Gambling. By enacting loot box regulations, it essentially makes it a liability for EA to implement these gambling-like mechanics. It makes it too big of a risk in terms of having to rate their games 18+, and that potentially compromising sales. So they'll be forced to remove the card packs, and hopefully that will ultimately result in EA focusing on the things that make a good game good, rather than focusing on the monetization machine aspect of what has become a gambling game with a soccer or football disguise. And this could ultimately mean better change for FIFA as a whole, not just in the UK, but also in major markets like the US. EA would have to rethink how they execute the Ultimate Team game mode, for example, which is where the gambling mechanics reside. Because they are changing it for a mass market like UK, they'd have to also change it for the US and just across the world, and change the game design, and hopefully for the better, with loot boxes no longer coming into play. The article then covers how currently in the UK, loot boxes aren't covered by existing gambling legislations, because technically the items you win do not have monetary value. But the article does cite that the DCMS does recognize that loot box winnings can easily be exchanged for cash on third-party websites. And while game companies might not officially condone these websites, the fact remains that they've created a platform, a foundation that allows these websites to crop up and permeate and flourish. And that's on the game companies to mitigate, but they haven't really taken any necessary steps. They instead figure it's a worthy compromise to have these websites out there so long as the game companies are making money. As far as what kind of evidence can be called for, there's so much out there. Here's an article from the BBC from July 9th, 2019, talking about kids who empty their parents' bank account playing FIFA. And what happened here was that the kids wanted Lionel Messi really badly, and they kept spending money on card packs without the parents' knowledge. And even after spending £550 on card packs, they never got Lionel Messi. These kids were very much engaging with compulsive gambling. EA dangled that carrot of Lionel Messi, made the probabilities of earning that character or that player just ridiculously and unreasonably low, and kept the kids hooked and spending and spending. And this is just the basic premise of loot boxes and how it affects not just kids but adults as well. And then here we have another article from July 15th, 2019 that gives you an array of examples of kids who compulsively spent money on gambling, some of which who did not know that they were actually spending real money, because the in-game currencies are all labeled differently as gems or whatever name a game company might give these purchasable in-game currencies. Later that year, on September 12, 2019, the Digital Culture, Media, and Sport Committee published an 84-page report into immersive and addictive technologies, and the general consensus was that there's just a lack of honesty and transparency with the loot box mechanics, and there was ample evidence suggesting from multiple organizations and experts that loot boxes flat out are gambling and that they're harmful, particularly to children. And here's the report in question. I actually already covered this, so I won't go through this again. You can click through these links in particular that really highlight the nefarious nature of loot boxes. A month later, on October of 2019, the Children's Commissioner for England chimed in, agreeing that loot boxes should be banned. This is after the Children's Commissioner discovered that, quote, kids feel pressured to spend money whilst gaming. There are plenty of testimonials that they have put out there. They actually published a 37-page long report that highlights this, that is worth looking at, that I'll also link in the description below, which I've already covered. So yeah, as you can see, there's plenty of evidence out there, and I suspect that it won't be particularly difficult to answer the call for evidence on the part of the Department for Digital Culture, Media, and Sport. A lot of the groundwork has already been done. It's just a matter of extrapolating on the evidence that's already out there and really nailing this issue to the ground. To close this video off, I just want to remind you how ridiculous it is that FIFA 20, despite having real gambling in it with the ability to spend real money for the random chance of earning a desired reward, which is exactly what gambling is, this game has a rating of PEGI 3, while Pokemon Red, of all games, is rated higher at PEGI 12 because it has virtual gambling, meaning that there is like a casino area where you spend virtual currency that you cannot pay for with real money in any way. And I actually agree with this PEGI 12 rating based on that. But the same standards aren't being applied to FIFA 20, which has the real deal, real gambling, not fake gambling, real gambling. And yet, it is deemed to be a game that's more appropriate for kids than frickin' Pokemon. That right there shows you how messed up this system is. This shows you why the games industry needs to be regulated. This discrepancy makes zero sense. So yeah, we'll see how this call for evidence pans out, whether it leads to loot boxes being classified as gambling, and in turn forcing companies like EA to remove them because they would become too much of a financial and legal liability. That would be the ideal outcome, but only time will tell. What I will say is that the UK Parliament is clearly not amused by companies like EA trying to skirt the way around the issue, rebranding loot boxes as surprise mechanics when loot boxes have become stigmatized, and just, they're not falling for their bullshit. Frankly, the attempts that the games industry has made to justify their actions has been just piss poor, just sad and pathetic, to say the least. But anyway, that's that. That's it for today's story, ladies and gentlemen. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on UK calling for evidence with the potential for loot boxes being classified as gambling, what you hope this will yield ultimately. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.